Hi, everybody. Kara here, coming to you today with the topic of transcription skills and handwriting. So, remember that you will have handouts that you will want to have handy so that you can take notes. That's what those look like. And let's get started. Okay. All right, so let's take a look here. The ability to generate text is the most difficult of literacy tasks. It requires accuracy and fluency in a variety of areas. So if we look at our, you know how we love triangles in the OG structured literacy world. So here's another one for you. But you can see that the bottom of the pyramid there is made up of transcription skills and executive function. So what we mean by transcription skills is things like handwriting, keyboarding, and also spelling. So just the really sort of motor movements that are required for you to get the symbols on the paper. Okay. And not to mention, though, not that there's not any like cognitive ability involved, there certainly is, in the sense of, how do I spell this word? But the basics of like getting the symbols on the page, so to speak, for someone else to come along and interpret is transcription skills. But very closely really related and a foundational sort of skill also in written expression is executive functions. So attention, planning, reviewing, revising, self-regulation, all very important aspects of written expression. And then together, these two foundational areas here are necessary skills for students to translate language and ideas into written symbols. That's the idea here, right? So what text generation means is then it's sort of the outcome of those two things that we're either at the word level, the sentence level, or larger pieces like at the discourse level. And all of those things happen within sort of the arena of, drawing on your memory skills, your short-term memory, your working memory, and long-term memory. So lots and lots of areas, things that need to be kind of coordinated, have to come together in the right way to make this possible. And so let's talk about those cognitive demands. Now, it's not as if like listening and speaking and even reading, it's not like they don't demand cognitive energy. Obviously they do, but when we're specifically talking about written expression, we want to make sure that we're attending to a couple of things. One is cognitive capacity. That refers to the total amount of mental energy available for use in your working memory. So what is the capacity of your working memory? And the working memory is that memory that is involved in like holding information in your head, in your memory, and then doing something with it. And if you think about writing, so this is what I'm currently writing, right? This is the word that I'm on. But there's and I got to think about how to spell it. How do I form those letters? And not only that, but I'm thinking about what did I already write? What am I going to write? So, there are different strategies that we can use that teachers often use to kind of help with some of those demands. So for example, doing a word web or a brainstorming web or an outline, getting your thoughts down on paper. I always tell kids, if a student wants to write about something, they have to be able to at least list three different things that they're going to say about it. Okay, so there's lots of ways to help with working memory, and because your capacity cannot be it's not like we can work on building your cognitive capacity in terms of your working memory. Your capacity is what your capacity is. Okay. So cognitive load, on the other hand, refers to the total amount of mental effort being used in working memory. So I have this amount of capacity, this much available, right? Okay. How much am I using? How much is getting used up? Because remember, I can't, once that capacity starts to overflow, something's going to get lost. Okay, so cognitive capacity is how much is available. Cognitive load is how much am I using currently. So basic transcription and attention skills, if you can imagine, remember the bottom of the triangle, if those two things are taking up a lot of most of your cognitive capacity, then you don't have a lot left to work with in terms of those other important things, like, am I spelling it correctly? Is it making sense? Is it the correct grammar? I mean, all of those other things that are really more of the sort of content. So as much as we can, if students can become more automatic with the transcription and the attention skills, then their mind can focus more on that whole point of writing, which is text generation. That's what writing really is generating text. Another way to look at that is when we think about language development. Okay, so this kind of a summary of what we just said. When we think about language development, the first thing that happens, and you think about like when a baby is born, right? They're exposed to receptive spoken language, right? Listening. Remember, our brains are hardwired for speech, meaning all we need to have is exposure, and then students, they'll learn those that spoken receptive. Then, so otherwise known as listening. Then they start to express themselves their spoken language becomes expressive. Not only are they now taking it in, receiving it, they are also expressing, otherwise known as speaking. The next thing to develop is going to be receptive written language. So they're going to learn to read. Okay. And then the last thing to develop, and really because it's the hardest thing, is expressive written language, otherwise known as writing. So again, children learn to speak without being formally taught, but they must be taught to read and write. And even then, writing will always lag behind reading. You all are better readers than you are writers. Writing is more difficult, and they're not the same thing. It's not like writing is just it's not like they're just opposites of each other. You don't speak in the same way that you write. So there we go. That's what we're talking about today. Now let's talk about that graphomotor processing when we're specifically talking about transcription and handwriting skills. So the graphomotor processing is like the mechanical demands of handwriting and spelling. Like, what do my hands literally need to be doing? Young students have to allocate more cognitive capacity to graphomotor processing, and therefore they produce shorter, less complex text. Makes sense. Remember that capacity can only hold so much. So if you're using a lot of it just to get that transcription down, you don't have a lot. Your writing just can't be as complex. Children who write slowly cannot keep pace with the ideas and plans they can hold in their memory. So, I'm sure you've all seen this. You could have kids that can tell you, just a wonderful story about what they want to write. But that is the slower they are at transcribing their thoughts, the more of those thoughts are going to get lost. Again, because there's only so much capacity. So the goal is for this graphomotor process to become automatic. Here's some information about the stages of learning handwriting. And I'm not going to read these. You can certainly read this slide yourself, but It's a really nice overview of kind of the developmental stages that kids will go through. And I'm sure you can probably think about a student that you've had, or just in your own life, the things that, the way that you've kind of gone through that development. Okay, principles of teaching handwriting. Number one, ready reference, meaning have alphabet cards visible for student reference. Like make, especially in the beginning, obviously let them see like a letter strip or some way for them to look at how does that letter look? Because remember, to them, it's at first letters are just like, I don't know, lines and circles, basically lines and circles in different configurations. They're completely abstract. There's nothing about the letter T that would make you think T. It's totally abstract. So very important to have that reference ready for kids. Good posture. So flat back, a flat back chair with feet flat on the floor, a 90-degree angle at the hips, knees, and ankles. The desk 2 inches higher than the child's bent elbows. This is ideal here, non-writing hand anchoring paper. So, it is really important. I mean, it's not, and some of my friends who are of shorter stature talk about this sometimes too, that like, the world is kind of made for a certain height of person. And if you are much bigger than that or much smaller than that, then the kind of can be uncomfortable, sitting in a stool, for example, where your feet can't touch like where your feet should go. That's kind of can get uncomfortable. And the same thing is true for kids. So as much as possible, trying to find, whether that means taking like some kind of a box to kind of bring the floor up close to them, right? Versus lowering the table, because then you're going to have some kids where their knees are hitting the table. But don't sort of discount this idea of having that good posture, especially when you are particularly practicing handwriting. Okay. Proper pencil grasp, having that tripod grasp. And there's some prompts you can use. One of them is stop, pinch the paint. Like, I know this is a pen, but pretend it's a pencil that has like, a Ticonderoga pencil with a yellow. And then this is the where the lead is. So pinch the paint and then lift. There are others out there as well. Your writing implement is also important. Writing depends on accurate, ongoing kinesthetic feedback. Just the act of putting the pencil to the paper and getting that feedback is important. I found this out recently when I decided to start using an Apple Pencil with my iPad. And I really did not like how it didn't feel like I was writing. It didn't feel, I couldn't feel that resistance anymore. So you can buy a cover for your iPad or your device that when you want, so that if you want to use a pencil, it's called like paperweight, or I don't know, something like that. It'll give you that feedback, and that is important. So softer lead can help those students who need to push harder to get that sensory feedback, for example. Paper, of course, the type of paper you choose is also important. Paper patterns for tracing should start large and then get smaller. And paper position, also important. Like, how am I anchoring? How should my paper be positioned? How do I anchor it? Things like that. This is we do address this in our lessons with kids. So this is called Watch Our Writing. I cut and pasted this exactly from the Word Detective Notebook. So this is located in the Word Detective Notebook. So this is where it says, pencil, have a good grip. The eraser should be pointing over your shoulder, the hand that you write with. Your feet are flat on the floor. Your back is straight. Your paper is parallel to your writing arm. And your non-writing hand is anchoring the paper. Because those kids that like to just like write with one hand and then the paper moves all over the place. And then they try to like do one of these things. It's like, no, just anchor the paper. So all very important. Things that I think as adults we sometimes take for granted. And then we've got, what are some of the types of errors that students make with their handwriting? Of course, formation, size, directionality, and capitalization. So don't forget that errors include capitalizing letters that should not be. And this is really common. Kids don't remember how to make a lowercase b or d. So what do? In the middle of a word, they just write an uppercase b or d, which is really kind of smart. They get around that issue. And honestly, if you, depending on the type of writing task, you would probably just let that go and, come back later and do the editing and say, well, do we put a capital letter? Right. So again, keeping in mind that a lot of this depends somewhat on what is the goal of this particular writing assignment that you are giving. Like on our brainstorming sort of word web, it doesn't really matter if they use capital B's and D's, right? Just get your thoughts out. So some interventions. You can have special paper with the line names, like I've used sky, fence, grass paper. So the blue line at the top, the dotted line is like the fence line, and then the grass. And then we say down into the dirt. The dirt is the one that goes under the grass. Make sure, though, that you eventually generalize that to regular paper, especially for older kids. Speech moderated strokes. So if we talk about certain strokes that happen, we will see that there's a lot of repetition. So like, for example, start at the top, pull down, back up to the middle and around. That would be for a B. So you could say start at the skyline, pull down to the grass line, to the grass, back up to the fence and around. You can also, once you've seen what they've done, circle what is wrong with the formation and practice it again. So you see here I have JUMP. The J is not going down into the dirt as it should. And the P is floating up there, right? Whereas the P should be resting, and also the line should go down into the dirt, right? So this would be an example of how, as a teacher, this is the student wrote though it's in blue, and then as the teacher, I circled where the errors were. Practice in groups of anchor letters. So for example, one anchor letter is a C. So when we make the letter C, if students know how to make a C, well, very nicely, then they could change it into a D. So we'll say C the D. That really helps with the BD reversals. The best thing I've ever come across that, honestly, that's been the most successful. And you'll see that in the letter formation video that you're going to watch. And also a C can become an A, C, O, C, G, C, Q. And sometimes I'll play that game with kids. So I'll say C, O, and then they have to finish it as an O. C, G, and then they finish it as a G. So that you can have fun with it. And then, of course, practice writing fluency. So, for example, you could kind of do what I just did, but what you're doing instead is you're just at a certain common rhythm, you're giving them a new letter to write. You see if they can keep up. Okay, so it's like I would go D, G, L, Z, and it doesn't have to be that fast. Doesn't have to be that slow. You kind of find that place where you're kind of pushing them a bit, but you're also just kind of getting them to get some of that fluency. Okay. And of course, you'd want them to practice fluency only when they are very accurate. So if they can accurately and consistently write an A, then you would add that into that drill. Guided practice, of course, with immediate error correction. I can write that. Just assume that is an intervention for absolutely everything we ever talk about. Guided practice with immediate error correction. There's my references. So thank you very much. When you are completed with all of your notes, of course, you can upload them to Canvas. Thanks a lot.